Mm-hmm.
I couldn't find it on Canvas. When is the first exam?
The first exam is one third through the semester. That's what the syllabus says. So that's going to be sometime next week. So what we'll do today is we'll have a practice exam today, using exam one from last semester as a practice, and then next Wednesday we'll have the actual exam one.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks.
Hmm. So next Wednesday is going to be the 24th. Yep, we're one third through the semester already, or just about. All right, we got about 2.5 minutes or so. If there are any questions, I can try to answer some of the questions before we start the class. All right, so we got some questions coming through the text channel on Discord. Okay, sure. That I can do. I can show you some graphs or pictures. More. They're more like pictures. In fact, that would be helpful. If I just use that for some of the questions. In practice exam one. So I think that's one thing that we can certainly do. Oh, now that is a little beyond the class. This class, because we don't do actual math functions. But x squared is a fairly easy one. I mean, it's a parabola with 0, 0 as a part of the, as the bottom part of the cup, so to speak. Yeah, we're gonna go over the sample test. That is all we're gonna do today. Yeah, we can go over some of the questions. All of the questions, maybe. This is one of the variants. I don't know how many variants I have for this test. There's a whole bunch. Alright, so we got about half a minute before we start today's class. And I got the tablet on standby because I think it'll be helpful to use the tablet to explain some of the answers today. So I think that would be useful today. Alright, there we go. Alright, so we are going to get the class started today. And this is what we'll do today is we're going to go through a practice exam, for exam one. As you can see from the section number, this is not your class. Okay, this is from last semester. But I'm going to use this as a practice exam, so this way you know what to expect in your exam one next Wednesday. Now keep in mind that this is a synchronous class, which means there's no flexibility when it comes to when to take the exam. The exam will occur at exactly the same time as the lecture, which means next Wednesday the exam will start at noon and it will end at 1:20 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Okay, I gotta add the time zone thing because some people may say, but you didn't specify the time zone. Yes, I did. So that's going to be the time slot when the entire class is going to take the exam. All right, so I'll go over some of the instructions for the exam, and then we'll kind of get into the questions themselves. All the Discord channels will be disabled from the sense of no posting, but they are still readable. So if you want to refer back to one of the Discord channels for the class, you can still go back and read the messages, but you cannot post anything at that time. Alright, so Angel, you might want to mute your mic. Thank you. And each test, each student has a specific exam question. So this one is specifically for my ID. So you will receive an exam with your ID on it as a part of the file name. Like in this case, it's x1 dash and then w and then my employee ID, which is also a student ID. And the exam instructions clearly states that if you're not the individual with that ID, you don't work on this one. Okay, it is not for you. Is an individual exam, so there's no collaboration allowed in answering the questions. Online and offline resources can be used as long as there's no interaction or collaboration involved. So that generally speaking means you can refer to the class notes, you can go back to Canvas, look up past homework assignments, you can re-watch YouTube videos while you're taking the test. Not recommended, but if that's what you want to do, hey, not a problem. If you have taken notes while you attend the lectures, you can use your own notes too. I mean, there's not a whole lot of limitation, except I do not want any interaction or collaboration during the exam. Do not share or discuss any part of this exam with anyone in class or otherwise on the day of the exam. Now this applies last semester because it was an asynchronous class, so there are people taking the exam at different time slots. But this semester, this is a synchronous class, which means we are all going to take the class, we are all going to take the exam at exactly the same time. Grading is based on explanation and steps, demonstration of understanding of knowledge and problem-solving skills, not the final answer. In other words, if somebody just give me the final answer, that may worth 0 points. Okay, just the final answer is not worth any points. Write your answer in this document right after each question. I might change this, because I found that it is very difficult to generate a document that I can upload as a Google document and still maintain all the equations, all the math symbols. I can do it to a certain point, as you can see here. This document actually can upload to Google Doc with all the math stuff intact, but I had to try many times and remove things that do not work. So I might give you an HTML document that contains the questions, and then give you a Google Doc so that you can to capture your answers. So I haven't really quite decided yet on how to arrange that, but it is very likely that you get one document which is HTML just for the questions, and then I'll share another document to collect your answers. Next point says, do all your text editing in document. Do not copy and paste from an outside source. That's supposed to be outside, not output. Because I don't want to see massive copy and paste into your answer document. So you guys just need to kind of type in document. So don't use an editor on the side and then copy and paste. You can copy and paste non-text content such as images and cells from a spreadsheet. So if you want to work on a piece of paper and then you take a picture and then you say I don't want to write, I would much rather draw pictures and handwrite stuff, you can do that. Okay, so you can do that and then capture the picture and then paste it into the Google Doc that I will share with you. However, the overhead of doing that, you kind of have to take that into consideration. In other words, if you think I might need, let's say, a minute, okay, I know that's overkill, but let's just say that you need a minute to take pictures of all the pages of paper that you have written on and then upload and paste it into the Google Doc, you have to allow that much time for yourself. I have a script that will run at noon to open up the documents, and it will also run at 1:20 to unshare the documents. So I don't want you to be caught, okay, when you're halfway done, uploading your files, okay? In this case, there are 9 questions. They carry equal weight. The actual number of questions may or may not be the same, so I cannot guarantee you how many questions there are. Alright, so are there any questions about the instruction of exam 1, which is going to be about the same for exam 2 and the final exam? No questions? Alright, so let's move on. So questions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, I think they're all the same kind of question. So once again, this may not be the format of your exam, but I'm just going to go with what I had last semester, because we covered functions, but we also covered Aleph. Well, I can do a little bit of Aleph Null. No, I take it back. We did actually, cover the entire Aleph Null. So, Aleph Null is on the table as well as part of the scope of exam 1. But we'll go ahead and take a look at questions 1 first. They all have the same format. So if you know how to read the first one, you kind of know what the other ones will be expecting, what to expect from the other questions. So what you're given with is X, which is a set, Y is a set, and F is also a set. So the question does not make any assumption. It doesn't say that F is a function. So you have to read the individual parts. The first part says what is the value of the expression, and the expression is this portion here. Okay, it is a quantified statement that is either true or false. If the answer is true, give me an example of such a value D that makes this particular condition true. So let's check out what this condition is saying. Okay, I believe all of them are the same. Okay, so all of the other questions have exactly the same expression. So in this case, we have an existential quantifier on the outside. So the question is, can I find at least one value D that satisfies, the condition specified in the inside over here? Okay. And this D has to be an element from X. So that means, can I find 0, 1, or 2 such that for every nm in F, D does not equal to n. Alright, so what is that saying? It's basically asking you, is one of these elements in X, is it missing as a first item of a tuple from F? That is what it's asking. So we got a question coming in from the text channel, so I'm going to wait a little bit. Okay, but the typing has stopped, so I'm going to continue until I see a question popping up over there. Alright, so let's find out, right? So let's say D equals to 0, okay? So when D equals to 0, can we find, is it true that every 2 tuple in F, for every 2 tuple in F, the first item does not equal to 0? And in this case, we can definitely see, that's not true, because we can find at least one item in F where the first item does match 0, which is what we want. So that means, this universal quantifier is not going to work, because if you can find one example where D does equal to n, that means, the for all is not going to be true. So now we look at 1 and we ask, if D is 1, can we confirm that 1 does not appear as the first item of any one of the 2 tuples in F? And the answer is nope, because we found 1 over here, and all we need is 1, where D does equal to n, because then the for all or the universal quantifier is going to be false, or the universally quantified statement is false. So then we basically have to rule that out, and then we use 2, and then 2 doesn't work either, because we do have one element in f where the first item is 2, so the answer is false. If the answer is false, you just have to say false, and there's nothing else that you need to do. It's only when the answer is true, then you have to say which d makes, okay, I should put it. If the answer is true, then you have to answer, what value of d is going to make this portion true. So right now, this is false. Okay. Do we have any questions about the first part of each question? Okay, I don't see any questions in the text channel. All right, next question. The next question has about the same kind of thing. It is a quantified expression, but this time I say, is it true or is it false that there exist two elements, e and h, and both are coming from y, such that there exists a d in x, such that e does not equal to h, and de is an element of f, and dh is an element of f. Dh is an element of f. Okay, so let's go ahead and unpack this statement. Okay, because if all 9 questions have the same expression, that means the initial time that it takes to understand the question is not. It's just going to be paid off, as we answer the further questions. Okay, I think I got one question coming, but I don't see any actual text yet. All right. Which symbol means first element on F? Well, you gotta remember how to read a 2 tuple, right? So n is the first item of a 2 tuple because it is the first item inside the parenthesized list that is comma separated. That is the notation that we use for tuple in this class. Does that answer the question? Alright, so Aiden asks, so does any element of x map to 2 different elements of y? That is exactly what the second question is asking. Alright, so we are looking at 2 different elements in y, which is potentially the codomain, but I cannot say it's the codomain because we don't even know whether f is a function or not. All we know is I'm trying to identify 2 things in y, okay, such that there is at least one thing in x where d maps to both of them. So we have de, d maps to e, and then we also have dh, d maps to h as well, and both are elements of f. So we are trying to identify two tuples, both starting with d, which is coming from x, but one ends up with e and the other one ends up with h. And some people are going to say, but that's easy because there's no restriction that e and h cannot be the same. Well, there is a restriction because I did mention here that e does not equal to h. Okay, so basically the question is, like what Aiden said in the text channel, can I find one thing in x so that it maps to 2 different things in y? If the answer is yes, then you have to tell me what in x maps to 2 different things in y. And when we look at the set here, that is not true. Okay, 0 only maps to 1 and only one thing, 1 only maps to 1 and only one thing, and then 2 also only maps to 1 and only one thing. So the answer is also false for the second portion over here, which also means there's no need for me to give an example of such a value of d. The third question is asking, is f a function such that, okay, f is a function, x is the domain, and then y is the codomain. That's basically what this notation is representing. The answer, if the answer is no, okay, if f is not a function, then explain why it is not a function. So the first and the second part of the question really helps you with the third one. That was the intention. Okay, the intention was for people to evaluate the first expression. If this expression is true, then f is not a function because at least one element of x is not mapped to anything in y. On the other hand, if this condition is true, then we have at least one element in x that is mapped to two different things in y. That also makes it not a function. If both of these conditions are false, then f indeed is a function. If the answer is yes or true, you don't have to explain anything. Okay, so far up to this point, the first part of the question is true. Excuse me, I take it back. The first part is false, the second part is false, the third part is true. So there's no explaining that I need to do up to this point. And now would be a good time to also kind of graphically represent the set, okay, or the function. So I'm drawing on the side, and then we'll go back to look at that. So we got 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, and then we got 0 mapped to 2. We got 1 mapping to 0, and then we have 2 mapping to 1. Okay, so let me switch to the tablet so you can see the kind of more graphical representation. There we go. So that's one way that people use to kind of show the mapping. So from x, we have 0 going to 2, 1 going to 0, and then 2 going to 1. And we can see how each element of x is mapped to one and only one thing in y. So it is a function. And now we have some further questions to ask. Alright, so Aiden asks, can I label the bullet points on the test with A, B, C, D so we can refer to the previous answers? Yes, okay, that's a great idea. So instead of using a UL, as a container of these items, I can use a, what is the other one? What is the one that has a numbered bullets? UL is unnumbered, and then I can look it up. I mean, I can look up the HTML element that can do this. But yes, I can definitely refer to it. Yes, I can do that to the indented bullets too. There are many ways for me to do it. I can programmatically generate the label, so I can refer to the label of each part. I mean, so yes, I will remember to do that. Alright, so now we move on to complete this part only if f is a function. Now, since we know f is indeed a function, now we need to work on these 5 sub-questions. Alright, so we got some people asking questions. Excellent. Alright, so the first question is, if I have a question during the test, is that going to be handled by DM? Yes, it's going to be handled by DM. I will use a text channel, but it is going to be announcement only on the day of the exam. So there will be a text channel in the class server, so that if I have any announcement to make, it'll be announced through that channel. But if you have any questions for you to ask me, you have to direct message me. And then the next question is, what would be a general statement for A? What A are we talking about? I do not understand what A is referring to. The first item in the UL. So I'm assuming the question is about this one. First bullet. First bullet, like the one that I'm highlighting, or the first hollow bullet, which is here. I'm still waiting for the clarification of the question. Jay? And now we got 3 people typing. I'm guessing someone. Okay, first bullet. full bullet. I'm not there yet. I'm not there to answer the bijective thing yet. This is where we are at this point. So I'm going to address this question next. So if J is asking about the earlier, which is this one here, we talked about that already. And the answer is false. Okay. Well, everything is recorded, so you can always kind of go back and re-listen to the lecture after the class is done. Alright, so let's go ahead and answer this question. What is the value of, okay, so once again, we have a quantified expression for you to evaluate. So this one is asking, alright, so let's read this from the outside in. So the first part is, can I find two things in X? Potentially two different things, but we don't know yet whether they are different or not. So it's just asking, can we find, a C and a D in X as a set, and find at least one thing in Y, we call it E, such that C does not equal to D. Alright, well, so that rules out, C and D being the same thing. So C and D have to be different things coming from X. And because this is a conjunction, that means if C does equal to D, if C equals to D, then the answer is going to be false already. And then the second item is to say CE is an element of F, DE is also an element of F. Alright, so what is it really asking? Well, this time we have two things from X, which we already know is the domain, and one thing in Y, which already know is the codomain. So the question is asking, can I find at least one case that there are two items from the domain mapping to the same item in the codomain? And the answer is no in this case. There are no two elements in X mapping to the same thing in the codomain. So the answer is false, which also means, I don't need to give an example. You just have to say false in that case. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so here's another quantified expression that we have to evaluate, which is this one here. And it starts with a quantifier on the outside that says, can I find at least one H in Y such that, okay, so such that what, right? Such that for every DE in F, E does not equal to H, okay? So what it's looking for is, can I find at least one item in Y such that it is not mapped to by F? And the answer is also false in this case, because every single member in Y is mapped to using F. So the answer is false, which means I do not need to give such an example. So now I need to answer this question. Is F injective? The answer is yes. But remember, it's also asking why. So just giving me the answer, of true or false is not going to be enough. You have to tell me why you think F is injective. And in this case, the answer is already kind of presented here, because this condition is false. We cannot find two elements in X that map to the same element in Y. So that means F is mapping everything in X to distinct elements in Y, and as a result, F is injective. So that's kind of verbally how I would explain it. And then the next one asks, is F surjective? The answer is yes, it is also surjective, because based on the evaluation of this condition, we cannot find any element in Y that is not mapped to, and as a result, it is surjective. And then the last one is probably the easiest one to answer, because when F is injective and F is surjective, F is also known as bijective. So to answer the last portion, all you have to do in this case is to say F is both injective and surjective. That would be the explanation of why F is bijective. So do we have any questions about question number 1 of 9? Okay. So it would definitely sound like, oh no, we have to multiply this amount of time by 9. There's not enough time in 80 minutes to answer all of the questions. That was one of my students last semester said that. But that was actually not very true, because now that you understand what each expression is asking, they are all the same from questions 2 to question 9. So all we have to do is to kind of evaluate this thing here and ask, oh, okay, so this is really just asking, this is just asking, is there something in X that does not map to anything in Y? Oh, that's easy, because we can see that 1, okay, 1 in X does not map to anything in Y. So if I bind the value of D to 1, then this universal quantifier or universally quantified expression would be true, because what is in F? We got 0, 0. Okay, does 0 equal to 1? No. What about this one here? It's 2, 1. So n is 2. Does 2 equal to 1? No. Oh, okay. So that means this universally quantified statement is true when d equals to 1. So that would be the answer to this question. Is first of all, you have to answer yes or true. Then you have to say when d equals to 1. So that is what I'll be expecting for the first one. The second question, okay, the second question is basically asking, is there one thing in X that maps to two different things in Y? The answer is no. Okay, the answer is false, so I don't have to use an example to illustrate it. And then we get to the third part. Is f a function so that X is the domain and Y is the codomain? The answer is no, because 1 does not map to anything in the codomain. 1 is in the domain in X, or potentially the domain, but it maps to nothing in the codomain, and therefore f is not a function. Because in order for a mapping to be a function, each element in the proposed domain needs to map to one and only one item in the proposed codomain. Alright, so picture time. So the picture time, I'm drawing this on the tablet right now. And when I'm done drawing it, you will see it. So we have 0 maps to 0 in this case. And then, oh, okay, I drew the picture incorrectly. Because Y doesn't have 3 elements anymore, it only has 2. It only has 0 and 1. 0 maps to 0, and then 2 maps to 1. There we go. Okay, and now I'm switching over to the tablet. So this is for question number 1, this is for question number 2, and when you look at the actual mapping graphically, you can see how 1 in X does not map to anything in Y, and as a result, this F, which is still a set, okay, F is not a problem when you only look at it as a set of 2 tuples, but it is not a function, because one element, at least one element in X, does not map to anything in Y. So that would be the answer of question number 2. And because the rest says you'll complete this part only if f is a function, and since f is not a function, there's no need to, you should not be answering any one of these subparts, because f is not a function. So are we good with 2 of 9? Alright. Moving on to 3 of 9. So now that you already kind of get the hang of it, right? So the first one is, okay, can we find at least one item in X such that it doesn't map to anything in Y? So we say, does 0 map to something in Y? Yep, 0 maps to 1. Very good. Does 1 map to something in Y? 1 maps to 0. Very good. Does 2 map to something in Y? 2 maps to 0 in Y. Oh, okay. So the answer is going to be false for this part in question number 3. For the second part, we are looking for one thing in X that maps to 2 different things in Y. So we look at x and we look at 0. 0 maps to just 1 in y. Okay, that's fine. 1 maps to just 0 in y. That's fine too. And then 2 maps to just 0 in y2, so that is okay as well. So that means the answer is going to be false. We cannot find one thing in x that maps to two different things in y, so the answer is going to be false, which means there's no need to give me an example. And then we get to the third part here. F is indeed a function because every element in the domain in x maps to one and only one thing in y, so f is indeed a function. But the question says if the answer is no, explain why, but since the answer is yes, there's no need to explain in this case. But because f is a function, we have to answer these 5 subparts. The first part here, the first subpart, says, can we find two things in x that map to the same thing in y? 0 maps to 1, 1 maps to 0, 2 maps to 0. We can find 1 and 2 mapping to 0, so the answer is true in this case. So you do have to answer true first, and then you have to find what value in y is being mapped to by two different things in x. So that would be 0 in this case. So the answer for the first part, for the first part, is the answer is true, and e equals to 0 in this case, because 0 is mapped to from two different things in x. And then here we have the second part. Okay, the second subpart of the question is asking, can we find at least one thing in y that no one maps to? The answer is true, okay, because we can tell that there are at least two things, okay, and Aiden is correct. There are two things, but the answer says, I just want one example, okay. If you give me two, that's good, okay. But if you just give me one example, like, hey, look at 2 in y, it is not mapped to by anything in x, that's fine. You just have to say when x equals to 2, the answer, it satisfies the requirement. Okay, but if you give me both, no points will be taken off. It's just no need to give me both in this case because the question is only asking for one. All right, so we got a question coming from the text channel. Does it matter if we include D, E, or F in our explanation? The answer is yes. It is important to identify which one is H in this case. But D and E are not important. So you just have to say, one such example is when H equals to 2. That will be fine. Okay. All right. So moving on to this part, is F injective? The answer is no. And we do have the answer why, right? Because it specifically asks why. And the reason why F is not injective in this case is because there are two elements in x that map to the same element in y. And then is F surjective? The answer is no, because we have at least one element in y that is not mapped to. And then when we answer is F bijective, the answer is no, because F is not injective and surjective. Okay, so is that okay with question number 3? Oh, okay, I guess somebody may want to look at the picture, so we'll go ahead and draw a picture. So we got x, y, we got 0 going to 1, 1 going to 0, and 2 going to 0 as well. So now we look at the picture. That's this is for question number 3. And Aiden says, is bijective equals injective and surjective sufficient? That's one part of the answer, because that only gives me the definition of bijective. So you still have to say, because it is not injective and it is not surjective, that it is also not bijective. So don't rely on me doing the deduction. Assume I do not know how to deduce from earlier parts of the questions. Alright, so question number 4 of 5. So now that we kind of get the hang of it, it gets kind of easy, right? Because, the first part is just asking, is there one thing in X that maps to nothing in Y? And then the answer is false, okay? 0 maps to something, 1 maps to something, 2 maps to something. So the answer is false, which means I don't need to give an example. And then the second part here is asking, is there at least one thing in X that maps to 2 different things in Y? And the answer is also false, because you can see that 0 maps to 0, 1 maps to 1, 2 maps to 2. There's no one single thing in X that maps to 2 different things in Y. And f is indeed a function. And there's no need to explain any further, because it only says if the answer is no, explain why. But now we got the 5 subparts that we have to answer. This part is asking, are there 2 things in X that map to the same thing in Y? And then when you look at the mapping, the answer is no. So that means there's no need to give me any further example. And over here it is asking, is there anything in Y that is not mapped to? The answer is true in this case, because you can see that 3 is in Y and the mapping doesn't map anything to 3. So the answer is true in this case. X equals to 3 in this case. Is F injective? Yes, because everything in X maps to a distinct item in Y. Is F surjective? The answer is no, because there's at least one thing in Y, being 3, that is not mapped to. Is Y bijective? The answer is no, because bijection requires both injection and surjection, and in this case surjection is F is not surjective, so that's why it is also not bijective. So there we have 4 of 9. Moving on to 5 of 9. Alright, so let's go ahead and answer the first question. Is there anything in X that is not mapped to anything in Y? X has 1, 2, and 3, and we can see 1, 2, 1, 0, 1, 2. Sorry, X has 0, 1, 2, and we find 0, 1, 2 as the first item of at least 1, 2 tuple in F. So the answer is false for this part. And then we move on to this one. Is there one thing in at least one thing in X that maps to 2 different things in Y? And the answer is no, because 0 maps to just one thing in Y, 1 maps to just one thing in Y, 2 maps to just one thing in Y. So the answer is also no in this case. And then because the answers are no and no for the first 2 part, this is F is indeed a function. And since it is a function, you have to say, yes, F is a function, but then there's no need to further explain why it is a function. But then we get these 5 extra parts that we have to answer. Are there 2 elements in X, 2 different things in X that map to the same thing in Y? Yes. So we can see how 0 and 2, they both map to 2 in Y. So the answer is true in this case. And an example of such an E is 2, okay? Because E is an element of Y, not element of X, okay? So in this case, the 2 is E. So you have to say E equals to 2. And then the next one asks, is there anything in Y that is not mapped to? The answer is yes. We got 2. We got 0 and 1 in Y that are not mapped to. But since, so the answer is true, and then X equals 0 is an answer. X equals to 1 is also an answer. F is not injective because we have 2 different things in X mapping to the same thing in Y. F is not surjective because we have at least one element in Y that is not mapped to. And then F is also not bijective because it is not injective and it is not surjective. So it is not bijective. Okay, 6 of 9. 6 of 9, I mean, it's I mean, at this point, if you say, Tack, this is getting really boring. Well, I'm glad that you're feeling this is boring because it is supposed to, okay? Because it's the same question over and over again, just using different scenarios, okay? But it really is boiling down to asking about the same thing. Now, the converse is true also. If somebody doesn't understand the quantified expressions, that person would probably not get a very good score in this exam. So that part is true too. Alright, so getting back to this one, is there at least one thing in X that doesn't map to anything in Y? The answer is no, false. Okay, so this is not true. Is there one thing in X that maps to two different things in Y? The answer is also not true. So the answer is false over here, and as a result, F is indeed a function. So now we ask, are there two things in X that maps to the same thing in Y? The answer is yes, okay, because we got 0 and 1, both of them are mapping to 1, and then as a result, you have to use E equals to 1 as an example of what thing in Y that is mapped to by two different things from X. And then this one is asking, do we have anything in Y that is not mapped to? The answer is false, because Y this time only has two elements. It only has 0 and 1, and we can see that 0 is mapped to, we can see that 1 is mapped to, so everything in Y is indeed mapped to, which means the answer is false in this case, because the question is asking, do we see anything that is not mapped to? The answer is false. Okay, everything is mapped to, and that's why the answer is false. And F is not injective because we have 0 and 1 both mapping to 1. F is surjective. Okay, so this is the tricky part. Okay, it is surjective in this case because everything in Y are mapped to. But it is not bijective because bijection requires both injective and surjective. Even though we have surjective in this case, we do not have injective in this case, and as a result, it is not bijective. Whew. Finally, we got to 7 of 9. Yes, 7 of 9, the Borg, played by Jerry Ryan. Okay, I discovered some interesting facts about Jerry Ryan, the actress. So apparently, she was married to a prominent politician, also with a last name of Ryan. And apparently, Jerry Ryan was one of the reasons, one of the many things along the chain why Barack Obama got elected. So you can look it up, okay? You can look that up. It's interesting, fun fact, in politics. So I'll let those of you who are interested to look it up by yourself. Okay, so to answer the questions, is there at least one thing in X that doesn't map to anything in Y? The answer is no. So it is false in this case. Is there one thing in X that maps to two different things in Y? The answer is also false. So this is false over here. And as a result, F is indeed a function. And then we try to look for two items in X mapping to the same thing in Y. And the answer is no. Okay, so the answer is false in this case. Do we have anything in Y that is not? Whoa, hold on a second. I got a little bit too fast and careless. Okay, so there are indeed two things in X that maps to the same thing in Y, because we have 0 mapping to 1, 2 also mapping to 1. So in this case, the answer is true, and E equals to 1 is the other part of the answer. Yeah, so 0 and 2 both map to 1, but the answer wants to know what in the codomain is mapped to from multiple things in the domain. So E equals to 1 would be the answer. Yep, exactly, Jay. And then we move on to this one. Is there anything in the codomain that is not mapped to? The answer is false, okay, because we only got 0 and 1 in the codomain, and we can see 1 is mapped to, 0 is mapped to. We're good. Is F injective? The answer is no. Is F surjective? The answer is yes. Is f bijective? The answer is no, because in order for something to be bijective, it needs to be injective and surjective. But in this case, f is not injective, and as a result, it is not bijective. 8 of 9. Okay, it's almost there. Okay, so this time we ask, do we have anything in x that doesn't map to anything in y? 0 is mapped, 0 is mapped, 1 is mapped, 2 is mapped. So the answer is false for this part. Okay, even though 0 is mapped twice to something in y, it's okay, because it maps to at least one thing in y. That's what the first part is asking. Now for the second part, it is asking, do we have one thing in x that maps to two different things in y? Then the answer is true, because 0 maps to 1, 0 also maps to 2, so the answer is true in this case. And we have to use an example, and then d equals to 0 will be the answer. For bijection, okay, so I'm reading the text channel. For bijective, can we say x, the cardinality of x does not equal to the cardinality of y? So, okay, so first of all, you have to indicate it is not bijective. Okay, and if you use this as an explanation, you have to link why the inequality is leading to the function not being bijective. In other words, you have to explain it at least once, and then you can refer to C, answer of question number blah. But you have to show me the logical steps why you arrive to the conclusion that f is not bijective, simply because of the cardinality of x and y being different. So you have to give me the explanation and not just this leads to that. But why? Where are the intermediate steps? Okay, I need the intermediate steps. All right, so next one. F is not a function because one thing in x maps to two different things in y, because 0 maps to 1, 0 also maps to 2, and as a result, f is not a function, which means the other 5 questions do not answer. Okay, if somebody says f is not a function and then proceed to answer these 5 sub questions, I will take points off, because that doesn't make sense. Either somebody did not read fully the instruction, or somebody is confused. Either way, points will be taken off. All right, we're moving on to question 9 of 9. Almost there. So question 9 of 9, the first thing is there one thing in x that, at least one thing in x that doesn't map to anything in y? The answer is false, because 0 maps to something, 1 maps to something, 2 maps to something. We good. So the answer is false in this case. And then the second one asks, is there at least one thing in x that maps to two different things in y? The answer is also false, because 0 maps to 2, 1 maps to 0, 2 maps to 3. So there's not a single thing in x that maps to two different things in y. And as a result, f is indeed a function. And then we see whether there are two things in x, two different things in x that map to the same thing in y. And the answer is false, okay, because they all map to different things in y. And then the next one asks, is there at least one thing in y that is not mapped to? The answer is true, because we can see that 2 is mapped to, 0 is mapped to, 3 is mapped to. But what about 1? Okay, the element 1 in y is not mapped to at all, so that means x equals 1 is the answer, and you also have to indicate the answer is true. Is f injective? Yes. Is f surjective? No. Is f bijective? The answer is also no. So there we have it. We just answered all 9 questions in 50 minutes, and that includes all the explanation. Now, I didn't type anything down, because typing something down is going to take some time too, but the idea is they're about the same kind of question. Alright, so an example question about Aleph Null. Hmm, that is a good question. So in order to ask questions about out of null, I have to use one of the mapping functions, and it becomes kind of difficult to ask questions. So in the past, I have asked questions about using the G function to map a multi-dimensional space into a single-dimensional space. Um, I don't have any sample questions ready at this point about out of null, but I can give you something. Okay, so let me switch to the tablet. I can give you an idea of what I can ask. Um, okay, so let me turn on the tablet. There we go. All right. So let's just say that we have a two-dimensional space. Okay, so we have a two-dimensional space. We usually call this the x-axis, and we call this the y-axis. Okay, that's just fairly normal. but in order to do the mapping, I do not need to. Okay, so each coordinate is xy, x being the first tuple, first item of the tuple, and then y being the second item of the tuple. So if I want, so G is defined in class already, right? So G is defined to go from n Cartesian product with n, and then mapping this to n again. Okay, and G is defined in the module in a certain way. Okay, so G of I would call this AB is already defined. Okay, it is defined to be A plus B times A plus B plus 1, the whole thing divided by 2 plus B. That is how G is defined. But there's no requirement that I have to pass the x coordinate as A and the y coordinate as B. So that means I can say n equals to g of yx. I can transpose the coordinate, and it is still a valid mapping. Okay, it's just that the values would be a little bit off, right? So I might give you an example. Okay, I might give you concrete examples. So I may give you a concrete value for x, and a concrete value for n, and then I'm asking, how is the function defined? How is n defined using g? So I might ask you questions like that. Is that okay? I mean, does that kind of give you an idea of what kind of question I might be asking you, Yolanda? All right. So this gets more complicated when we have a three-dimensional space. So if you think about a three-dimensional space, we got x, y, and z. Okay, and I cannot remember usually how they label the three. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so if I want to map a three-dimensional space into a one-dimensional space, there are many ways to do it, because each point in this space is known as x, y, z. It is a three tuple. Okay, to identify one point in a three-dimensional space, we have a three tuple. But to map a three tuple to a single natural number, I have multiple ways to do it, right? Because I can say, let's group y and z first, and then we'll go ahead and apply x over here. So I need double parentheses. I keep forgetting that I need double parentheses in this case. Yeah. So there are multiple ways to do the mapping, because when you are given a coordinate, there are ways to do this, and then the other way around is the same way too. So when I give you a natural number and I say let's reverse this back to a three-dimensional space point, okay, the actual mapping, the way I group things can be, there are many ways to do the grouping. So that way you kind of need to test which one makes sense, so to resolve that. I think in general, you can kind of count on the fact that I'm not going to ask questions where the entire class will give me the same answer. That is just not going to happen when tests are online. So I will need a way to generate variations for different people. And there are only so many ways to generate those kinds of questions when it comes to the topic of Aleph Null. Any questions about that? So understanding the G function in the Aleph Null module is important, okay? Because I might have text in the question that simply says, refer to the G function as defined in the Aleph Null module. And you can refer to all the modules, everything that we use in this class, all the YouTube stuff you can use. The only restriction is, no collaboration during the exam. I mean, that's kind of the rule, because whatever a person gets as a score should reflect that person's capability in this class, and only of that person in this class. That's kind of how I define academic integrity. Any other questions about exam 1? So now I have to think about how to ask questions, because I don't want to ask the same kind of question as these ones. So I'm going to have to come up with a new way of asking questions where I can still test whether you have the knowledge of quantified statements, the definition of what a function is, the definition of injection, surjection, and bijection, but in a way that is different from what you see here. So that is my challenge before next Wednesday. Any other questions? I'm just looking at the time. We got another 20 minutes, so if there are no questions, I will just kind of move forward with additional topics. I got at least one question coming through the text channel, so I'm gonna wait for that question. I have no idea what I'm going to change. So the expressions can all be changed. What I'm asking can be changed. These examples can all be changed. It will still be testing the same thing. I mean, it will still be testing existential universal quantifiers. It will still be testing, do you understand what is implication? Do you understand what is conjunction? Do you understand what is injection? Do you understand what is surjection? Do you understand what is bijection? Do you understand what is a tuple? Do you understand this notation? Means f is a function mapping from x to y. So the knowledge that I'm testing will still be the same. Okay, it's just that I will find a different way to test it. So to answer Ivan's question, yes, I will change at least a few things. And then not Monday. That what is not Monday? Because the question does not really specify. So the question is directed to Li Yu. What are you asking about Monday? Alright, so Ivan is asking if I would change the Goliaths. Okay, so first thing first, why would I change it? Those are the notations that we have been using in class. I mean, that's how we quantify stuff. And then to answer Liu's question, yes, that was what I said at the beginning part of this lecture, and I also typed it. Yes, test will be next Wednesday, from noon to 1:20 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I will stay consistent with the notation that I have already introduced in class. I'm not going to start new notations, but I will test whether you understand the notations that we have already discussed in class. And then Tim is asking, so the expressions in the exam will be different from the practice test, but they will be the same 1 to 9 in the test, just like the practice one? Nope, that is not what I said. I did not make any promises like that. There's no promise that I have made so far except for the date, the time, the duration, and also the scope of the exam. I will change just about everything that I can change in a week, but still test the same material. That is my challenge, not yours. Oh, it's going to be different, Jay. You can count on it because I don't want you guys to just know, oh, so we know how to solve the problems in the practice test. We just have to practice, 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 practice. And then on next Wednesday, we just have to reapply what we have already practiced so many times, then we will be okay. Nope, that is not what I want to test. I want to see if you guys can solve problems that you may not have seen before, but using only the material that we have introduced in this class. That is what I'm trying to test. That is in the syllabus. I mean, if you read the syllabus, you know that this is how I conduct my tests. Yes, conceptually it will still be the same material, but the way I ask the questions can be very different. No, I don't want Google Chrome plugins. I don't use Proctorial. I have other ways. Yes, there is a time limit, Andrew. I think this is the third time I'm saying this, maybe fourth. The exam starts at noon. It ends at 1:20 p.m. next Wednesday, Pacific Standard Time. So you have exactly 80 minutes. Well, plus or minus a little bit. I will open the exam about. Okay, I will make sure that you guys get at least 80 minutes. In other words, by noon, you will have everything that you need to get started with the test. But I will also start the script to unshare documents at 1:20. Now, exactly when your document will be unshared, I do not know. Okay, because it all depends on how. It depends on the efficiency of running Google App Scripts. So some people may start a little bit, there may be a few fudge seconds, okay? But don't count on those fudge seconds. Is there a way to bypass? Yeah, I know. That's exactly why I do not use those approaches. And there are a lot of professors feeling that if they turn on all of those things and turn on Proctorial, everything is going to be good. Nope. Nope, not even close. That's what I've been trying to tell other professors, and I think the people from math, science, and computer science, they all kind of know that, they understand it, but when it comes to ESL, English, history, psychology, and so on, I think many people are still thinking Proctorial is the way to go. If I turn on Proctorial, everything will be good. Tim is asking, am I saying in the exam the expressions in question 1 can differ from question 2? I am not making any promises whatsoever. So everything can be different. There's no guarantee of what can be the same. The only thing I can guarantee is the scope, the amount of time, and the fact that this exam is individual. It's not a group effort. There's no collaboration allowed. Those are the only things I can guarantee. Other than that, I'm not making any promises or guarantees. You just have to understand the stuff. I mean, how hard can that be? Yep, so it boils down to how do you study, okay? I think Angel is asking a very good question. How do you study for an exam? Okay? Now, from personal experience, I know that in high school, including prestigious ones, okay, they train people to do something many times over. And then in the actual exam, it will be about the same thing, so people can just reapply what they have practiced over and over again, and that's how they get good scores. But to me, that does not reflect problem solving skills. Okay, and in my classes, in the syllabus, I stated very explicitly that I am focusing on problem solving skills. Okay, you know, all the questions are going to be problem solving type of questions. And why? It's not because I want people to really suffer or get low grades. It's because this is what the industry is about. Um, you, I mean, people just have to learn something on the fly. I mean, you just get an assignment from your boss. The boss says, I need you to make something like this. You can't even ask sometimes, so what kind of database should I use? What kind of programming language should I use? The boss cannot care less. Okay, the boss just says, I need something that works by this time. It is a problem solving kind of thing. You have to learn on the fly. Yep. So I think I'm being transparent enough, maybe translucent. You can kind of tell the hue of the color, but not quite the shape. Because I don't know yet. I personally do not know what kind of question I'll be able to come up with, so I cannot tell you guys what it is going to be. I cannot travel in time, especially into the future. But if you guys need clarification of the symbols, the meaning of words and stuff like that, I can help with that. That's partially why the actual exam is 1 week from the practice exam, because now we have Monday for you guys to ask questions. So assuming you guys will study, over, from here to Monday, then you might find that, oh, okay, there are a few things I'm not really quite clear. If I have this quantified expression applied to this particular set, is it true or is it false? So you can ask questions on Monday so that you can, make sure that you understand the concepts. Is there a place I can study the symbols? Easy. All the modules and all the YouTubes recorded up to this point, that's where all this stuff is coming from, right? I mean, we have been using these things, since the beginning of the semester. So other than that, you can always look up in Google, okay? So Google is really helpful. I mean, I use Google a lot when I need to learn something new. So you just look up universal quantifier, right? So now you can see what a universal quantifier is. You can also look up what is existential quantifier, okay, which is down here. What is a universal and existential quantifier? So there are lots of resources, and I suggest that you guys kind of write your own notes, okay? If you find a useful definition that you can relate to easily, just make your own notes, okay? Not even a link to the original document, make your own notes. So that way everything is at one single spot, you know where that is, and because you wrote it, okay, you also, it's just a reminder. I mean, when I prepare for tests, when I was in college, by the time I'm done with creating that one sheet, cheat sheet, I don't need it anymore, because when I wrote everything on that cheat sheet, I already got everything in my head. Yes, the module does explain the definitions, but if you need extra help, or another way to explain the definitions, you're more than welcome to go somewhere else, using Google, and then add those additional explanations to mine, and then make your own notes, okay? Make your own document, okay, so that all the definitions are at one place, okay, instead of sprinkled around all the modules, in various places. You can put all of the definitions in one place, so it's easy for you to look up the definitions. Is there any textbook that I recommend for reading? I do not know of any textbook. I'm not using any textbook in this class, so I can't really recommend a particular one. But on the internet, all of the concepts that we have talked about so far, they are all on the internet. If you want to look up Aleph Null, okay, so there we go. We have Aleph Null. It is the cardinality of the set of natural numbers. So, I mean, all of these concepts, they have existed for hundreds of years. These are not things that I invent. I cannot say the same thing in CISP440 because I did invent the architecture that I use in that class. But with this class, this is old stuff. Okay, this is really old stuff, except for the definition of the G function, which I did kind of turn it into a closed form. Other than that, everything has existed for a long time. So I'm sorry that I cannot make a recommendation of a textbook, but if you just read and search and then make sure that you fully understand the concepts, you can just go ahead and compile all of the material that you have located, that you find, okay, this is a good way to explain this. I like this picture, I like this graph, I like how this person explains that concept. Pull all of those resources together into your own notes. Okay, that's the whole idea of preparing for your own material for the test. Okay, because instead of reading the module that I write, because I write things in a certain way so that I can understand all that stuff after the fact. But you may prefer a different way of explaining things. You might prefer more pictures. You might prefer a table format, and stuff like that. Then you can go ahead and include that into the material that you plan to use for the exam. I mean, you have a whole week to prep for the exam, so getting that material ready, the tables, the documents, and whatnot, that is all going to help you in the exam. All right, so I got a. Let me check my direct message. Okay, so I answered that question already. Excellent. All right, so any other questions about the exam? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions from the text channel. You guys can form study groups for our, because I think it's a good idea to study with somebody else. For one thing, it gives you structure, especially if you have a study group of 4 people or so. If you forget to show up in a study session, the other 3 will remind you. It's like, hey, Tech, you promised that you'll be here to study with us. What's happening? You go like, oh, I totally forgot about it. Let's do it now, right? I mean, so it's good to have a study group. You guys can, because different people understand things in a slightly different way. So when they try to explain to each other the same concept, the process of explaining something to somebody else helps to deepen the understanding of the concept, and then being explained by someone else also helps because some usually is a different way of looking at the same thing, and that usually helps. Okay, it's just that in the exam I don't want people to be collaborating. Okay, but when you're studying, there's no problem with studying together. I think it's helpful for many people to study together. I have never done that myself, but I think for most people it is helpful. Any other questions? Alright, so if there are no questions, I will use the next 5 minutes to start a new topic. I know you guys are thinking, no, we cannot start a new topic with only 5 minutes remaining. And I say, why not? Oh, road taking, that's it. I almost forgot about that. Let's do that. And that will use up the next 5 minutes. Alright. So what word should I use today? Attendance is important, not because I am an old school high school teacher and go like, hey, I need people to be here. But I think the structure really helps. If I don't take roll and people say, I don't need to be there, I'll catch up later. Okay? Later starts with a day, then becomes 2 days, then becomes a week, then becomes 2 weeks, and then before we know it, some people will be falling so far behind that they cannot catch up anymore. And that's not good for anyone. And that is why I take roll. I did a quick survey with one of my other classes, and most students in that class, said having a synchronous class, where you're required to show up, kind of helps. It kind of sucks sometimes, but it kind of helps because people have to show up in order to be counted in class, and that kind of it has it helps to provide a structure. All right. So what is tax word for row taking on today? Today's the 17th. And we're going to say structure. And for those of you who want to use struct because you like that word in C, fine, we can use struct too. So both structure and struct count as our row taking word for today. And I need to remember to update the question and then save and publish. Oh, wait, I need to set up the time first. Yeah, I know how much time you guys need to do this. Let's see. There we go. Up to 1:30 p.m. So we got another 12 minutes to do this. I think that should be enough time. Save and publish. There we go. Yes, struct or structure, either way is fine. Oh yeah, we can do that. Yep, we got about 2 minutes. So we want to go over the homework that was due on Monday. And that was functions. There we go. Alright, so we want to use a 1 if it is a function, and if it is a function and also injective, we want to add a 2, and if it is a function and it is also surjective, we want to add a 4. In other words, very similar to what we have been doing today. Alright, so in this case we got 0, 1, 0, 1, 2, 0. It is not even a function, so I put a 0 here. For question number 2, this one has 0, 2, 2. It is not even a function, so I put a 0 here. And then this one is a function because we have 0, 1, 2, but it is not injective because everything maps to 1, which leaves 0 and 2 not mapped to at all. So it is a function, which means we have a 1, but it is not injective, it is not surjective either, so it's just 1. Yeah, the one that has x2 in it, which we'll see, I'm just going to give you guys points, if you even tried. It's my problem of setting up, Canvas, for that particular question. All right, so in this one, it is a function. Oh, it's exactly the same as the previous. Oh, it is the same as the previous one. Okay, moving on to the next one. Yeah, so with this one, you just have to say 0. But whatever you put here, I'm gonna give you a point. Okay, if people do not put anything here, I won't give those people any points. But if you just put something here, I'll give you a point. It is an issue when I set up Canvas, for this kind of question. So I need to go back and fix it. It is not your fault. It is mine. So here we have it. And then with this one, 0, 2, 2, not even a function, so put a 0 here. And then we get to the last question. So we got 0, 1, 2, and they map to 2, 2, and 3. So that means it is just a function. It is not injective nor surjective. And that's it. Yeah, it was automatically marked incorrect. I have to go in and manually change all of them. So that's something I have to do before the end of the semester. So remind me to do it, if I keep forgetting it. Just nudge me. All right, so let's check, make sure that I get points for where I should get points. And this is the only one where it is going to mark me wrong regardless. And then we got a point, a point. Okay, so that kind of explains the homework that was due on Monday. Oh, no, no, no. Some of you will remember. Even though it is a point out of 6, and that 6 points is, I cannot remember, it's a very small portion out of 20%. Someone is going to remember it, which is fine. I mean, I want you guys to remind me because it is rightfully your point. I think Angel means 87% because 87.5% is the crossover from a B to an A. Alrighty. So we're good in terms of time. It is 1:22. So between now and next Monday, I think it's a good idea to study for the test as if the test is on Monday. Okay, so this way you go over all the material. Okay, everything up to and including the Aleph Null module is going to be in the test. So if you have any questions about the topics that we have introduced in class, Monday would be a good day to ask. I would also, if I had time to study for this class, I would also kind of go over the videos a little bit. You don't have to watch, every minute by the minute. If you think, okay, I got this down, you can just kind of fast forward by a few minutes and then just kind of check in. And as you're studying, as you're reading the modules or watching the videos, make your own notes. Okay, just put all the definitions to the one place. And if you have a question about, okay, but I can't remember exactly what this expression means, okay, then you want to write down the question, and then you can ask me that question during my office hour, which is 11 to noon every day, or you can also ask those questions on Monday, okay? So use this time. I give you guys a week to get ready for the exam because I want you guys to really use this time to get ready for the exam. All right. So I don't have anything else to add at this point, other than, on Monday, if there are no questions about the material for the exam, we're just going to move on. And the next topic that we'll be working on, okay, I can't find my mouse pointer. There we go. So the next topic that we'll be on, oh, this is the wrong class too. Let me get back to 440. So the next topic will be on relations. So if you basically finish studying and there's nothing else you need to ask about the material for exam 1, then move on to relations, because that's what we'll be talking about on Monday after I answer all the questions regarding exam 1. Alright, so I don't have anything to add. We are past the end time of the class already. So I'll see you guys next Monday. Have a nice weekend. I know we only got one class this week. That's not good because it means a lot of us would completely forget the material from past weeks. So there we go. Have a nice weekend. I'll see you on Monday unless you have